When I talk about becoming rich, I'm not just talking about money. I'm talking about mindset, discipline, and purpose. I've learned that true wealth starts inside you long before it shows up in your bank account. If you train your mind to believe in growth, hard work, and faith, you can change your entire life. Rich people don't wait for opportunities. They prepare for them. And once you understand that nothing can stop you from rising, I learned early that everything begins in the mind. Before the money, before the titles, before the applause, there is a conversation you have with yourself when no one else is around. That conversation determines whether you rise or stay exactly where you are. I've seen talented people stay broke in spirit because they never upgraded the way they think. And I've seen ordinary people do extraordinary things simply because they believe they could become more than their circumstances. That's why I say this with conviction. If you want to become rich, you must first make your mindset rich. A rich mindset doesn't mean arrogance. It doesn't mean thinking you're better than anyone else. It means believing that growth is possible, that learning never stops, and that your current situation is not your final destination. I had moments when doubt tried to move in and unpack its bags. Fear whispered, "You're not enough. You're too late. Someone else is better." But I had to make a decision. Either I listen to that voice or I train a stronger one. So I chose to feed the voice that said, "Keep going. Get better. Stay disciplined." I stopped allowing my past to define my future. Where I came from did not get to decide where I was going. Too many people carry old labels like they're permanent tattoos: poor, average, unlucky, forgotten. I tore those labels off mentally. I understood that if I kept identifying with limitation would follow me everywhere. The mind is powerful like that. It doesn't argue with you. Whatever you tell it repeatedly, it accepts as truth. So I became intentional about what I told myself every single day. I reminded myself that struggle is not a sign of failure. It's a sign of preparation. Just because it's hard doesn't mean it's wrong. Diamonds don't form under comfort. They form under pressure. When life pushed back, I didn't complain about how unfair it was. I asked, "What is this trying to teach me?" That question alone changed everything. It shifted me from victim to student. And students always grow. I also learned that a rich mindset respects time. Time is more valuable than money because you can always earn more money, but you never get more time. I stopped wasting hours on distractions that gave me nothing in return. I became protective of my focus. I realized that what I give my attention to eventually shapes my life. So I fed my mind with books, with wisdom, with conversations that challenge me instead of keeping me comfortable. Comfort is expensive. It costs you your future. There were days when motivation was nowhere to be found. That's when mindset mattered most. Because motivation comes and goes, but discipline stays if you train it. A rich mindset understands that feelings don't run the show. Commitment does. I showed up even when I didn't feel like it. I worked even when nobody noticed. I prepared even when there was no guarantee. That's how confidence is built. Not from winning, but from knowing you did the work. I stopped comparing my journey to someone else's highlight reel. Comparison is one of the fastest ways to kill a rich mindset. There will always be someone ahead of you and someone behind you. That's not your concern. Your job is to be better than who you were yesterday. When I focused on my own lane, my own growth, my own pace, I found peace. And peace gives you clarity. Clarity gives you power. A rich mindset also understands the value of patience. Overnight success is a myth people sell to avoid the truth about consistency. I embraced the process. I trusted that small steps taken daily would compound into something powerful over time. I didn't rush excellence. I respected it. I knew that if I stayed faithful to the grind, the results would eventually show up. And when they did, I would be ready for them. I learned to speak life over my goals. Words matter. The way you talk about yourself shapes the way you see yourself. I stopped saying, "can't," and replaced it with, "I'm learning." I stopped saying, "I'm not good at this," and started saying, "I'm getting better." That shift may sound small, but it rewired my thinking. A rich mindset is not about pretending everything is perfect. It's about believing improvement is always possible. I also accepted that failure is not the opposite of success. It's part of it. A poor mindset avoids failure. A rich mindset studies it. When I fell short, I didn't quit. I adjusted. I asked hard questions. I refined my approach. Every setback became a setup for growth. The only real failure was refusing to try again. Most importantly, I learned to believe in myself before the world did. Applause is nice, but it's not necessary. Validation is temporary, but self-belief lasts. There were times when nobody clapped, nobody called, nobody cared. But I kept showing up for myself. Because if you don't believe you're worth the effort, no one else will either. Making my mindset rich was the foundation of everything that came later. Money follows thinking. Opportunities follow preparation. Success follows belief backed by action. Once I understood that, I stopped chasing wealth and started becoming the kind of person wealth is attracted to. And that changed my life forever. There comes a moment in every man's life when he has to look in the mirror and stop negotiating with the truth. I had that moment. I realized that as long as I blamed my circumstances, my upbringing, the system, or the people around me, I was giving away my power. Blame feels good for a second because it protects the ego, but it costs you everything in the long run. The day I took full responsibility for my life was the day I truly became free. I understood that responsibility is not punishment, it's permission. Permission to change, permission to grow, permission to decide who I become next. When something went wrong, I stopped asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and started asking, "What can I do about it?" That shift changed how I walked, how I talked, how I worked. Because once you accept that you are responsible, you also accept that you are capable. I didn't choose where I started, but I chose where I was going. That's a hard truth for some people to accept. It's easier to say life is unfair and stop trying. But I learned that fairness has nothing to do with greatness. The world doesn't owe me anything. And the moment I stopped expecting it to, I stopped being disappointed and started being disciplined. Taking responsibility meant owning my mistakes without excuses. When I failed, I didn't hide. I didn't point fingers. I said, "That one's on me." And you know what came with that? Respect for myself first. Because when you're honest about your flaws, you give yourself a chance to fix them. Denial keeps you stuck. Ownership moves you forward. I also learned that responsibility shows up in the small things. Showing up on time, being prepared, keeping your word when it's inconvenient, doing what you said you would do long after the feeling passed. People think responsibility is about big decisions, but it's built in the little habits you repeat every day. Excellence is not an accident. It's a choice you make consistently. There were moments when life knocked me down hard. Moments when it would have been easy to say, anyone in my position would have quit. But I didn't want to be just anyone. I wanted to be accountable. I wanted to be dependable. I wanted to be the kind of man who stands up when it hurts, because character is revealed under pressure, not comfort. I stopped waiting for permission. Too many people wait for approval before they move, as if someone else is responsible for giving them the green light. I realized nobody was coming to save me. And that wasn't depressing, it was empowering. Because if nobody is coming, then everything depends on me, and I can work with that. Taking responsibility also meant choosing my response, even when I couldn't control the situation. I couldn't control rejection, delays, or closed doors. But I could control my attitude, my effort, and my persistence. Life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you respond to it. I decided my response would be disciplined, focused, and forward-moving. I learned that responsibility requires sacrifice. You can't say you want success and live like you don't. You can't want a better future while repeating the same habits that created your current situation. I gave up comfort for growth. I gave up excuses for progress. I gave up short-term pleasure for long-term purpose. Responsibility demands that kind of honesty. There were days when taking responsibility felt lonely. When others complained, I worked. When others quit, I stayed. When others blamed, I adjusted. That path isn't crowded, but it's worth it. Because while excuses multiply problems, responsibility multiplies solutions. I also realized that taking responsibility for my life meant taking responsibility for my mindset, my emotions, and my actions. Nobody else controls how I think unless I let them. Nobody else controls my effort unless I surrender it. I became intentional about what I allowed into my mind, who I listened to, and how I spoke to myself. Because if I didn't manage my inner world, my outer world would always be chaotic. Responsibility taught me humility. It reminded me that I still had a lot to learn. That growth requires listening, adjusting, and sometimes admitting you were wrong. Pride keeps you stuck. Responsibility keeps you evolving. I chose evolution over ego. I stopped saying, "That's just how I am." That phrase is a trap. It sounds like self-acceptance, but it's really self-neglect. I accepted who I was, but I committed to who I was becoming. Responsibility means you don't settle for your lowest version. You work toward your highest one. And here's the truth most people don't want to hear: the moment you take full responsibility for your life, you lose the right to complain. But you gain the power to change everything. That trade is worth it every single time. I didn't become stronger because life got easier. I became stronger because I decided to carry my own weight. I stopped asking for sympathy and started demanding excellence from myself. And that decision changed my standards, my results, and my destiny. Taking full responsibility didn't make my journey perfect, but it made it mine. And when you own your life fully and unapologetically, you step into a level of strength no one can take from you. I learned that real work doesn't happen when the lights are on. It happens in the quiet moments when nobody is clapping, nobody is watching, and nobody even knows your name. That's where character is built. That's where discipline is forged. Anybody can look good when the room is full, but the truth is revealed when you're alone with your responsibilities and your excuses are staring you in the face. There were days when I could have taken it easy, when no one would have noticed if I slowed down or skipped a step. And that's exactly when the work mattered most. Because success has a strange way of showing up later and asking, "What did you do when no one was watching?" It doesn't care about your intentions. It cares about your habits. I understood early on that talent will get you noticed, but discipline will keep you relevant. I've seen gifted people fade away because they relied on what came naturally to them. And I've seen less talented people rise to the top because they were willing to outwork everyone else. When nobody was around, they showed up anyway. They practiced anyway. They prepared anyway. That's the difference. Working when no one is watching means holding yourself to a standard higher than applause. It means doing the right thing even when there's no reward attached to it. I didn't wait for praise to give my best. I didn't wait for recognition to stay committed. I treated every unseen effort like it mattered, because it did. There were moments when fatigue hit hard, when my body was tired and my mind was louder than the room. That's when excuses tried to sound reasonable. You've done enough. You can rest today. Nobody will know. But I knew. And that was enough. Because self-respect is built in those moments. You either keep your word to yourself or you break it. And I refuse to become someone who breaks promises to himself. I learned that consistency beats intensity every time. Anybody can work hard for a week. Anybody can be motivated for a month. But showing up day after day, year after year, without guaranteed results, that's where greatness lies. When no one is watching, you're not fueled by validation, you're fueled by purpose. I didn't romanticize the grind. Some days it was boring. Some days it was frustrating. Some days it felt like I was putting effort into a black hole. But I trusted the process. I believed that unseen work compounds quietly, like interest. One day it shows up all at once, and people call it luck. They didn't see the late nights. They didn't see the repetition. They didn't see the discipline. But that's not my concern. Results speak for themselves. Working in silence also taught me humility. It reminded me that I'm always a student, that there's always room to improve. When you're not performing for an audience, you can focus on getting better instead of looking better. I didn't chase perfection. I chased progress. Small improvements stacked daily became something powerful over time. I stopped needing external pressure to push me. I became self-driven, self-governed. I learned to regulate my effort regardless of mood or circumstance. That's maturity. That's professionalism. That's how you separate amateurs from masters. Masters don't wait to feel inspired. They work because it's who they are. There were times when recognition went to someone else. Times when my effort went unnoticed. I didn't let that poison my spirit. Because bitterness is expensive, it drains energy you could be using to grow. I focused on my lane, my craft, my responsibility. I trusted that if I kept sharpening my skills, opportunity would eventually meet me prepared. I learned that what you do in private eventually introduces you in public. Your habits show up in your confidence. Your preparation shows up in your performance. When the moment comes, and it always comes, you don't rise to the occasion. You fall back on your training. That's why I trained when nobody was watching. Working unseen also strengthened my integrity. I didn't need supervision to do my best. I didn't need threats or deadlines to stay disciplined. I developed an internal standard that didn't change based on who was in the room. That kind of integrity gives you peace. You sleep better knowing you gave your best, even when nobody saw it. I realized that success doesn't respond to noise, it responds to consistency. Talking about your goals feels good, but working toward them quietly gets results. I stopped announcing my plans and started executing them. Silence became my advantage. While others were explaining, I was improving. There's a certain confidence that comes from knowing you put in the work. Not arrogance. Confidence. It's quiet. It's steady. It doesn't need to prove anything. When you've done the work in the dark, you don't panic in the light. Pressure doesn't break you. It reveals you. I also learned that working when no one is watching builds resilience. When setbacks came, I didn't collapse. I adjusted because I wasn't dependent on applause to keep going. My motivation came from within, and that made me dangerous in the best way. Unshakable. Unstoppable. The truth is everyone wants the reward, but not everyone wants the responsibility. Everyone wants the spotlight, but few want the solitude. I chose solitude. I chose discipline. I chose to honor the work even when it didn't honor me back right away. And eventually it did. Not because I demanded it, but because I earned it. I didn't work in silence so people would notice me. I worked in silence so that when the moment came, I would be ready. And readiness, that's what separates dreams from reality. I used to think money was the goal. I really did. I thought if I could just get enough of it, everything else would fall into place. But life has a way of teaching you lessons when you're paying attention. And one of the most important lessons I learned is this: money doesn't respond to need, and it doesn't respond to desperation. Money responds to value. The moment I understood that, everything changed. I stopped asking, how do I make more money? And started asking, how do I become more valuable? That question forced me to look inward. It made me examine my skills, my work ethic, my attitude, and the way I showed up for other people. Because the truth is, the world doesn't pay you for what you want. It pays you for what you can deliver. Value is about usefulness. It's about solving problems. It's about making someone's life easier, better, or more meaningful through what you do. When I focused on being excellent at my craft, not just good enough, doors started opening that money alone could never unlock. Excellence gets attention. Excellence creates demand, and demand creates opportunity. I realized that chasing money makes you impatient, but chasing value makes you disciplined. When money is the goal, shortcuts look tempting. When value is the goal, shortcuts don't make sense. You take your time. You learn the fundamentals. You respect the process. You understand that mastery is built, not rushed. I invested in myself long before the world invested in me. I studied, I practiced, I refined my skills when nobody was paying me for it. That wasn't easy. There were moments when it felt like I was putting effort into something with no immediate return. But I believed in delayed gratification. I trusted that if I became undeniable in my value, compensation would follow sooner or later. I stopped thinking like a consumer and started thinking like a contributor. Instead of asking, "What can I get?" I ask, "What can I give?" That mindset shift was powerful. Because when you give value consistently, people remember you. They trust you. They recommend you. And trust is worth more than any paycheck. I learned that value isn't just about talent. It's about reliability. Showing up on time, being prepared, doing more than what's expected, keeping your word. These things don't sound glamorous, but they separate professionals from amateurs. Talent opens the door, but reliability keeps you in the room. I also understood that value grows when you're willing to learn. The moment you think you know everything, your value starts shrinking. I stayed curious. I stayed teachable. I listened more than I talked. I learned from people younger than me, older than me, better than me. Growth became a lifestyle, not a phase. Creating value also meant being willing to serve before being celebrated. Too many people want the spotlight without the sacrifice. They want the reward without the responsibility. But value is often built behind the scenes. It's built in preparation, in patience, in persistence. And when the time comes, it shows up naturally. I stopped measuring success by how much money I made and started measuring it by how much impact I had. When your work improves lives, even in small ways, you're creating real wealth. And that kind of wealth lasts. It creates legacy. It opens doors for others, not just yourself. I learned that money is a byproduct, not a purpose. When money becomes the purpose, your work loses meaning. When purpose drives your work, money becomes a tool. Nothing more, nothing less. A tool to build, to give, to grow. Not something to worship. I also learned that value requires courage. The courage to be different. The courage to take risks. The courage to say no to opportunities that don't align with your standards. Every time I chose integrity over convenience, my value increased. People may not always like it, but they respect it. And respect travels far. There were times when I was underpaid. Times when my effort wasn't matched by compensation. I didn't let that harden me. I let it sharpen me. I focused on growth instead of resentment. Because bitterness blocks blessing. Growth attracts it. I understood that when you focus on value, you stop competing and start creating. You don't worry about who's ahead or behind. You worry about how you can be better today than you were yesterday. That mindset keeps you moving forward without distraction. Creating value also meant lifting others as I climbed. Helping someone else grow doesn't take away from your success. It multiplies it. When you contribute to others, you expand your influence. And influence is a form of wealth that money can't buy. I didn't rush the reward. I respected the journey. I stayed committed to excellence even when the numbers didn't add up yet. Because I knew something others didn't want to accept. If you become valuable enough, you don't have to chase money. Money will find you. In the end, I learned that real wealth isn't about what you have, it's about what you offer. Skills, wisdom, integrity, impact. These are assets that never lose value. And when you focus your life on building them, financial success becomes a natural outcome, not a constant struggle. I stopped chasing money the day I decided to chase excellence. And that decision paid me back in ways I never imagined. There will come a time when you're standing alone with a vision that only you can see. No applause, no agreement, no encouragement. Just a quiet idea in your heart that refuses to leave you alone. That's when belief matters most. Not public belief, private belief. The kind that holds you up when everyone else is sitting down, shaking their heads, telling you to be realistic. I learned that if you wait for everyone to understand your vision, you'll never move. Most people can only see as far as their own fears allow them. So when they tell you it won't work, what they're really saying is they couldn't do it. And that's not your burden to carry. I had to learn to separate advice from projection. Wisdom is valuable, but doubt disguised as concern can be deadly. Believing in your vision means accepting that loneliness is part of the process. There are seasons when you're early, and being early feels exactly like being wrong. People question you, they mock you, they remind you of your limitations. And if you're not careful, their voices can get louder than your own. That's why I guarded my vision. I didn't explain it to people who were committed to misunderstanding it. I understood that belief isn't loud. It doesn't argue. It doesn't beg for approval. It works. Quietly, relentlessly. When others laughed, I listened but didn't stop. When others doubted, I adjusted but didn't quit, because belief isn't pretending fear doesn't exist, it's moving forward anyway. There were moments when even I questioned myself. Late nights, long roads, closed doors. That's when belief stopped being a feeling and became a decision. I decided that quitting wasn't an option. Not because success was guaranteed, but because regret was unacceptable. I'd rather fail trying than succeed at living someone else's expectations. I learned that vision doesn't come with a full map. You don't get all the answers at once. You get the next step, and the next step requires faith. Faith that your effort matters. Faith that your growth is happening even when results are slow. Faith that the work you're doing today is preparing you for something you can't see yet. People will tell you to have a backup plan. I understand the logic, but I also understand this. If your backup plan becomes your comfort zone, your vision never gets a fair chance. I didn't leave room for excuses. I left room for growth. I burned the bridges that led back to doubt and forced myself to move forward. Believing in your vision also means being willing to evolve it. Stubbornness isn't belief. Ego isn't faith. I stayed flexible in my approach but firm in my purpose. If one door closed, I didn't question the destination. I questioned the route. That's maturity. That's resilience. I stopped needing validation to stay committed. Likes fade. Praise fades. But purpose doesn't. When your why is strong enough, you don't need applause to keep going. You wake up driven. You move with intention. You stay disciplined even when nobody's cheering. There were times when people came back later and said, "I always believed in you." I smiled, but I remembered. I remembered the silence. I remembered the doubt, and I didn't hold it against them. Everyone arrives at belief in their own time. My job was never to convince them. My job was to stay true to myself. Belief gave me patience. It taught me to wait without quitting, to trust timing without losing urgency, to keep planting seeds even when the soil looked empty. Because I knew something was happening underground. Roots were forming. Strength was building. I also learned that belief requires courage. The courage to fail publicly, to start over quietly, to be misunderstood for a season. That kind of courage can't be borrowed. You have to develop it. And you develop it by choosing your vision over your fear again and again. I stopped asking people for permission to dream big. I stopped shrinking my goals to make others comfortable. If my vision made people uneasy, I took that as a sign I was thinking beyond average. Comfort never created greatness. Discomfort does. Believing in your vision doesn't mean you won't feel tired. You will. It doesn't mean you won't feel discouraged. You will. But belief reminds you why you started. It reminds you who you're becoming. And that's enough to keep moving. I learned to talk to myself before I let the world talk to me. I reminded myself daily that progress is progress no matter how small. That consistency beats intensity. That discipline will carry you when motivation disappears. And one day, slowly, quietly, things begin to shift. Opportunities appear, doors open, people notice, and suddenly the same vision that was doubted becomes admired. Not because it changed, but because you didn't. Believing in your vision when no one else does is one of the hardest things you'll ever do. But it's also one of the most powerful. Because when you stay faithful to what you see inside, you become unstoppable on the outside. I didn't need everyone to believe in me. I just needed to believe enough for myself. And that was always enough.